So hello everyone, thank you for coming to this colloque and thank you to the organizers. So let's get started. While the Pledge of Allegiance refers to one nation, indivisible, it isn't hard to see more and more fractures between social groups, political alliances, and even within institutions themselves. As we can see, I'm certainly not the first person to be interested in this question during the Trump era. In this talk, I'd like to concentrate on one specific headline that we see here. Americans are divided over everything except division. The headline comes from this 2018 NBC Wall Street Journal poll that showed 8 in 10 surveyed Americans thought that the country was mainly or totally divided. I'm using these numbers from 2018 as the bulk of my data that you're about to hear about comes from 2018. Interestingly, as we see here, rural residents were marginally more convinced or concerned by this division, which brings us to Pike and Wayne counties in Pennsylvania. These 2 rural counties are where I've carried out my fieldwork. One question I've asked during the 40 semi-guided interviews that I've carried out are how interviewees feel about today's political climate, be it locally in Pennsylvania or nationally. The first response is typically nonverbal, so I'll get an exasperated sigh, a frustrated eye roll, maybe some nervous laughter. What follows, however, is a reiteration of this NBC Wall Street Journal poll. Participants may disagree on particular issues like welfare or abortion, but they all agree that the country is too divided. In my paper, I present some of the responses that participants have given regarding this political climate and certain activist or political groups. Paradoxically, the goal of most of these movements or concepts associated with the division that they decry, so feminism and political correctness, which we'll hear a lot about today, is to foster inclusiveness and greater political participation. However, participants largely view these groups as divisive or too extreme, even violent, despite agreeing elsewhere in interviews with many of their tenets or benefiting from the adoption of policies that these movements support. These movements are then associated with the 2 main political parties, adding to this sense of division and polarization. Furthermore, this perceived divide has pushed many to say that they feel entirely unrepresented by their elected officials at all levels, but especially the federal level, and then to disengage from the political process entirely. They believe that the 2-party system and recent presidencies are proof of a political class that has ignored their concerns. In all, I'm hoping to demonstrate today that the fear of an eroding sense of national unity is a telling result of an increasingly divided 2-party system and of particularly polarizing presidencies under Obama and Trump. While these presidencies have divided voters for different reasons, the resulting polarization has led to widespread concerns about political disunity. Scholars argue that what makes the United States exceptional lies in its founding. Unlike feudal societies of Europe, where inequality was linked to one's station at birth, the founders believed, at least for free white men, that all men are created equal. This, plus a strong belief in what would later be labeled the American dream, solidified their sense of being united by something more than simple blood or land ties. This all created a sense of American identity, however inaccessible it was and arguably still can be for many segments of the American populace. Paradoxically, this American identity points to different values. As James Davidson Hunter highlighted in his 1991 Culture Wars, The Struggle to Define America, American values split between progressive and orthodox views in the 1960s, and the issues associated with these values became a major political focus. If there is fundamental discord about which values define Americanness, it follows that Americans themselves might perceive a split between groups of Americans who adhere to a different set of American values than they do, especially as these values have been amplified by, in the case of my paper, at least the last 2 decades of culture wars. While questions regarding shifting opinions about the country's economic organization abound, so we've just seen Bernie Sanders win the New Hampshire primary, this paper will not address divisions that could be linked to changing perceptions of economic organization, nor will it enter into an analysis of economic conditions that could also lead to this divide. Instead, I focus uniquely on the sociocultural. So, It's in this context of the culture wars that in my fieldwork, the perception of an increasingly divided nation is the most prevalent preoccupation of interviewed residents, linked notably to groups whose principles and goals touch on various debates within the culture wars and purport differing fundamental American values. So, one of the last topics on my questionnaire is the variety of political and activist groups or concepts associated with elements of the culture wars, including Black Lives Matter and feminism. I ask about political correctness, about guns, about the presence of Confederate flags in Pennsylvania, and other topics. This picture actually comes from Wayne County. If you're intrigued by it, we can talk more about it in the Q&A. The objective of this line of questioning is to get a sense of participants' anti-Black sentiment, the salience of white identity for them, misogyny and internalized sexism, as well as a general sense of their political orientation for those who didn't outright tell me or give me sort of hints about where they stood politically. What I found was that while opinions associated these groups and concepts with the increasing political divisions and blamed them in part for it. So I'm going to show you a lot of quotes today. I won't have time to read them to you, but if you'd like to go back to some during the questions, please feel free to ask me. When it came to feminists, most participants saw them as too extreme and self-centered, despite a majority of my participants being women who have presumably benefited from some of the policies fought for and supported by feminists. As we see here, this participant qualified the feminist movement as selfish, in addition to expressing stereotyped views on their cleanliness. She maintained a certain understanding of feminism, even though most feminists do argue for the deconstruction of gender roles and beauty standards for all people, and not just cisgender women. Feminists are, in part, responsible for detracting from a sense of national unity, according to interviewees, by creating this discord between men and women. Even interviewees who said they support feminist movements thought that they might go too far, involving a sort of hatred of men. We can talk later during the question and answer about how women siding with masculinity, so to speak, and rejecting feminism ties into whiteness and the vote for Trump. When I spoke about Black Lives Matter, the response was quite similar. Most participants said they understood the reasons behind activists' anger and saw their fight as legitimate when it came to police brutality. However, many also saw them as extremely divisive, especially in their techniques that were perceived as violent and confrontational. This was also the case for those who knew about the anti-fascist movement. They viewed their methods as too extreme, regardless of what they're fighting for. Regarding political correctness, a concept that Trump campaigned against, interviewees seemed to think it had gone too far. Two cited changing the words to the Christmas song, "Baby, It's Cold Outside," and another cited this scene from the Peanuts Thanksgiving as proof of political correctness run amok. The former, "Baby, It's Cold Outside," is criticized for glorifying rape culture. "I really can't stay, baby, it's cold outside, have another drink, hey, what's in this drink?" and so on. The latter in this scene is criticized because the only character of color we see here is seen sitting on a lawn chair on the opposite side of the table from the rest of the crew who are on dining chairs. It's of note that while I Googled to find this picture, I actually found it mostly on right-wing blogs who were decrying the leftist response to it. And it appears that the original critiques of this scene come from Twitter. One participant, as we see here, saw political correctness as an academic concept that should have never left the university, as it has been, as she explains, reappropriated and misappropriated by politicians. Because these concepts and movements have entered the Democrats' and Republicans' vocabulary, either in trying to espouse them or refuse them, participants understood their divisiveness as a contributing factor to the polarization between the parties. In this next part, then, I'll explain how this has led participants to blame the two-party system itself for the increased divisiveness, and how this is perceived to threaten American democracy. Political parties have a number of fundamental roles in any democracy, but the potential for abuse can be high. One of these potential pitfalls is division, by splitting Americans into two teams, as one interviewee put it, or by tanking the opposing party's initiatives in Congress when there's a divided government, as we saw notably at the end of Obama's second term, for example. Political scientists and other observers, like the media or politicians themselves, have noticed increased political polarization within this two-party system, in terms both of party platforms, candidates, and partisan voting, as well as in terms of public opinion. Since 1990, the most divisive issues are those belonging to the culture wars, notably abortion and questions of sexual morality. As we see from this Pew Research Center data, Americans have become increasingly ideologically consistent around two separate poles. And as we see here, party identification has surpassed all other aspects in identity when it comes to predicting views on any particular topic. Participants cited the two-party system and this sense of party loyalty and party polarization as part of the problem. In interviews, most participants expressed being dissatisfied with either choice during the 2016 presidential election, resulting in enough political apathy that many decided not to vote. Locally speaking, in Pike and Wayne, because both of these rural counties tend to vote Republican, many left-leaning participants felt like their vote just didn't matter due to the local conservative culture. As observed by others, these parties are increasingly polarized, leaving some to make ideological sacrifices, so to speak, in order to maintain partisan affiliation. So we've got vote blue no matter who, anyone but Trump. These are sort of the lesser of two evils mantra of 2020. Others, who are less party loyal or who are more centrist, can remove themselves from this political process entirely. The effect of this divide on participants was marked in interviews, with some saying that they feel it's simply impossible to talk about issues with some people, especially in rural areas like the counties I study, because there's this us versus them mentality and a partisan divide. This leads some to a sort of self-isolation where they avoid confronting friends and family on their views that they disagree with. Another, however, of my participants seemed to be in agreement with this self-isolation, saying if something isn't politically correct enough for you, well, walk away. Another participant felt that it was even dangerous to discuss politics in such a climate, calling it a war zone. And again, we can come back to these. I know I'm going quickly. He continued, the same participant, by explaining that he felt that the very institutions that are meant to protect American democracy are threatened by such intense partisanship. These quotes highlight the sense participants have that the principles of mutual toleration, forbearance, and even a toleration of violence, 3 of Levitsky and Ziblatt's 4 basic rules of a functioning democracy, seem to be seriously threatened by the divisive political climate in the context of increasingly polarized parties. Aside from this increased polarization within the parties and between the parties, resulting in the perceived lack of representation among participants, interviewees often cited Obama and Trump as the fault lines of this increasing divide. The presidencies of Obama and Trump, according to various studies, are among the most polarizing in American history. I argue that this is for different but intertwining reasons. We can't discuss Obama's presidency without remembering the racist birther conspiracy championed by none other than one future President Trump. The discourse from opponents to Obama's candidacy and following presidency was one based largely on what it fundamentally meant to be American, with so many refusing to accept a black president that they were ready to strip him of his nationality, as we see here, by claiming that he was really born in Kenya or somewhere else, not in the United States, or to cast doubt on him and his religious affiliation via Islamophobic and incorrect rumors that he was secretly a Muslim. The common denominator here is race and otherness, which launched the full salience of white identity, as Duke political scientist Ashley Jardina explores in her 2019 White Identity Politics. In it, she argues that white people are increasingly seeing themselves as white since Obama's election, contrary to critical race theorists' assertion that whiteness is consistently unmarked, naturalized, and universalized among whites. She finds that not all those who identify as white do so to proclaim a sense of white pride or white nationalism. They do so rather out of a sense of in-group identification. The fact remains, however, that in the face of demographic changes and the first black president, an increasing number of Americans are seeing their whiteness for perhaps the first time. Furthermore, anti-Obama sentiment in a Republican-held Congress led to a legislatively impossible situation for Democrats and blocked many of Obama's policy projects. Not only were Americans becoming increasingly divided amongst themselves, but politicians were less and less willing to work across the partisan aisle. The transition to Trump, of course, is naturally made, as Trump took this somewhat unmobilized whiteness and transformed it into a rallying cry for whites to band together as a self-aware group to take the country back from rapists and drug dealers flocking from the US to Mexico, and also from radical Islamic terrorists, to use his terminology. His associates and supporters, like KKK leader David Duke and policy architect Stephen Miller, for example, have very explicitly used these looming demographic changes, the Hispanification or browning of America, and theories of a great replacement to bolster alt-right support of Trump. I argue in this paper that in addition to the increased salience of white identity, Trump's presidency is also polarizing because of his refusal of democratic norms and long-standing political traditions. The impeachment trial that we've just seen is perhaps evidence enough of both a refusal to play by the traditional rules of democracy as well as extreme partisanship, with, of course, the historic exception of Mitt Romney. The result, however, is that Americans are increasingly seeing themselves as us versus them along these partisan lines solidified by this presidency. In all, this headline that Americans are divided over everything except division proves to hold true in Pike and Wayne counties, where, despite disagreeing on policy, potential 2020 candidates, or other issues, nearly all participants since I started this project in 2016 have cited increasing political divisiveness as the most pressing issue facing the country. This divide has many fearing a loss of a sense of national unity, which is perceived as a threat to American democracy. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.